All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Um, I'm just going to jump right in here and talk about our agenda, so welcome. Um, Today, I'm excited about this presentation because this is a project I worked with Jessica on back when I was with First Coast Invasive Working Group. And also, I just think it's a really great case study in, um, determination and what it takes really, even once something has been early detected, sometimes to get it contained and potentially eradicated. So today we have Jessica Spencer with the U.S. Army Corps. She's going to talk about a population of salt cedar that she's been working on for a number of years in Northeast Florida. And then, as always, I have some FISP and CISMA updates for you all. So I'll go ahead and click over to Jessica's slide, and as I get her set up to control the screen here, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat box. And I will either, if the situation prevents itself, I may interject, or I may just wait till the end for all questions. But if something comes up and you want to make sure it gets covered, just type it in the chat box and I'll keep an eye on that. And we'll also have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica Spencer. And hopefully, Jessica, you should be able to go ahead and start advancing the slides as well.
Okay, so I'm Jessica Spencer. I work for the Army Corps of Engineers in their Invasive Species Management branch, but I'm also the co-chair for the First Coast Invasive Working Group up here in Northeast Florida. And today I'm going to be talking to you about not necessarily a EDRR success story yet. So I kind of changed the title of my presentation to 12 years battling salt cedar in Florida, a slow and steady path to eradication. It's hard to feel like 12 years is really early detection, rapid response, but I will say that a lot of my efforts on Corps managed lands have been EDRR. There's just this one remaining population, which if you've ever talked to me about salt cedar, I'm sure you've heard me talk about Reed Island. But there's just that one remaining population at Reed Island that continues to produce seed, which spreads to these other locations. But all of the other locations, the EDRR part of it has been successful. We've been able to maintain control, find any new germination very early and control it before it's able to start reproducing. So that's kind of the ongoing EDRR that's been happening for 12 years now, but luckily we are getting close to finally tackling that last remaining population. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Oh, Emily, I'm not sure that I can, there it is. So I'll give you a brief history of salt cedar. The genus is Tamarix. There are several species that are established in the US, but it is native to Eurasia and Northern Africa. It was introduced to the US back in the early 1800s, and since then, there's several species out west that have infested over 1 million acres, particularly along the Colorado River Basin. But the species that we have here in Florida is Tamarix canariensis, and this is just a picture of one of the dense infestations that we had on one of our dredge disposal sites along the St. Johns River. So the invasive characteristics of this plant, it's a very prolific seed producer. It can produce over 1 million seeds per year per plant. It can also reproduce vegetatively. So if you just cut the stem, it readily resprouts from the roots. In addition, that cut stem has a ton of these little bumps or lenticels along the stem. And if those land in any kind of moist soil, any one of those lenticels can sprout roots and start growing a new plant from that cut stem. So it's a very determined plant. They grow very quickly, and we've seen plants produce seed within the first year. This is actually a picture of a 5-month-old seedling that already had flowers on it. So they do have a very quick turnaround time as far as their reproduction. They form dense monocultures like you saw in that previous picture, and they also have the ability to alter the soil chemistry. So part of the reason that it's called salt cedar is that the plant produces these deep tap roots that bring up all these salts from deep in the soil, and then it exudes those salts out of the leaves. And if you touch them, you can actually feel the graininess of the salt crystals on the leaves. So when those leaves fall to the ground, it effectively salts the earth. And so any plants that are not salt tolerant would not be able to survive under those conditions. But of course, salt cedar is well adapted to saline soils, so it can grow just fine. So that's what kind of facilitates these dense monocultures forming. The seed characteristics, they produce tiny little seeds. They're about 1 millimeter in size, and they've got that nice big plume on the top, so they are very easily dispersed by wind or water. Each plant, like I said, produces over 1 million seeds per year. There's no dormancy requirement, so they don't have to go through, any cold period or anything like that before they're able to germinate. If the seed gets blown onto moist soil, it can germinate within 24 hours. So these little seeds are packed and ready to go. The good news is that they only are viable for 3 to 40 weeks, depending on the site conditions. So it doesn't have a long-lived seed bank, which is one of the only weaknesses of this plant. So that's what gives us the opportunity to be able to have the hope of eventually eradicating this. So as far as the history of salt cedar in Florida, back in 2008, the National Park Service at the Timucuan Preserve here in Jacksonville alerted the Corps to salt cedar that was growing on one of our dredge disposal sites, Buck Island. You can see the picture of it there. And Buck Island is right on the border of the Timucuan Preserve, right along the edge of the St. Johns River. So they located that population. We got the National Park Service exotic plant management team to come up. We had some other volunteers that went out there and did control efforts on Buck Island. And unfortunately, there wasn't really any follow-up after that initial treatment. So when I started working for the Corps in 2010, I had gone to a dredge disposal site, a different site, and saw salt cedar growing there, which immediately set off red flags in my mind because I had just come from out west. I knew how problematic it was out there. So I did some subsequent surveys and found salt cedar growing on many of the dredge material management areas, or DMMAs. You'll probably see that scattered throughout my presentation. So I surveyed these other DMMAs and found it in several locations in the Jacksonville area. And so I kind of took it on as my pet project, or nemesis, you may say. So I started focusing on salt cedar control at that point back in 2010. So these are the dredge material sites where we found salt cedar in the Jacksonville area, and you'll notice the map is pretty zoomed out. And that's because if you look down there at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see just south of Palm Valley, there's that light blue rectangle. And that is a dredge disposal site that is managed by the Florida Inland Navigation District as part of the Intracoastal Waterway. And that was the southernmost extent of the salt cedar population. I don't believe that it was spread there by wind or water. I think that was probably equipment transfer. The Florida Inland Navigation District is also responsible for the 2 northernmost sites at the top of the screen, the red and purple. And they have mowing equipment and other vehicles that will go from one dredge disposal site to the next. And so I have a feeling that that's why we saw, the longer distance dispersal on those sites, probably related to equipment transfer. And if we zoom in, you can see, you know, most of those larger sites are right there along the St. Johns River. And you'll also notice that I've marked with the little yellow push pins what I call escapees. So these are salt cedar locations that were found, you know, just by chance with, you know, doing public outreach. I got some phone calls. I also spotted some of these on my own. And we found some locations where it was obvious that, you know, these were relatively close to some of our known populations. They had been able to get established in some of these outlying areas, but we were able to locate those and get those controlled as well. So in 2010, right after we located those dense monocultures, we were able to target those for our contractor to be able to do the control work. So luckily, most of the dense infestations were on lands that were managed by the Corps. So we had active projects and active funding sources that we were able to tap into and get some of these large infestations treated. And then once that heavy lift was done to eliminate those large infestations, then the follow-up monitoring and treatments were much less labor intensive. And I was actually able to do most of that on my own. Of course, the one exception being Reed Island, which is kind of in the middle of the map right there, that sort of little finger-like projection that curves around into Mill Cove. It was a retired DMMA, and so there wasn't any active funding or management authority to tackle those populations. So that's kind of been that lingering seed source that we've been trying to address. But this is another shot of that Tamarix monoculture that we had at Bartram Island. Again, these are large, you know, 15 to 20 foot tall plants. You can see all those little pink or pinkish white stem tips. Those are all the flowers. So they're definitely actively producing flowers and seeds, you know, able to spread over large areas, large distances by wind and water. So luckily, I was able to get the contractors to treat those infestations, which was a huge relief. Just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with when I talk about these dredge material management areas, DMMAs, when we have a dredging event, you know, the boats come in, they dig the material out of the bottom of the channel, they load it onto a barge, and then that barge has a giant pump that they pump the material through this big pipe to the dredge disposal site. And then the pipe outfall is kind of where you see that white fan of sand material. So the heavier material falls out right there near the outfall of the pipe. The finer materials kind of get carried downslope with the water. And over time, the water is either drained out through weir structures at the DMMA or it slowly evaporates. So eventually the material dries out and the puddle gets smaller and smaller and smaller until the next dredging event comes. So when I go out to the site, most of the water has dried down. I'm dealing with these pretty wide open expanses of bare ground. And all of those kind of dark little plumes of vegetation that you see scattered through that bare area, those are all salt cedar seedlings. So the nice thing is that I don't have to do a very intensive like grid type survey. They're pretty readily visible when you go out to the sites. So that makes my job a little bit easier. But you can see that the site conditions can also be somewhat treacherous. The most important thing is waiting until the material has dried enough so that you're not going to sink up to your neck. But then when it does dry out, some of those clay areas turn into this maze of, you know, giant foot deep cracks that you can definitely twist an ankle or worse very easily. And those conditions get even more treacherous when areas like this get covered over with a thin layer of grass, so you can't see the cracks below your feet. So there are times where it can be very difficult to get out to a salt cedar plant. Um, so navigating those conditions can make things rather difficult. But those false conditions of a slowly receding shoreline provide the salt cedar with its ideal habitat for germination. So this is another shot out at Bartram Island where you can see with that slowly receding water, the conditions were just perfect for these seeds to land in this area and germinate. Luckily, again, all of these are relatively small, so for the most part, I'm just doing hand pulling. I don't have to haul around a giant backpack sprayer full of herbicide. So, you know, the EDRR part of this is locating these at this stage before they're able to, you know, grow these deep, deep tap roots and, you know, not be able to hand pull. So, like I said, most of the work that I was doing with the monitoring and treatments was a lot of physical hand pulling. So since we did that initial heavy lift of the contractors controlling the monocultures, from 2011 to 2020, I've killed approximately 4,375 salt cedars. These are just, you know, a smattering of those locations. Again, most of that is hand pulling, but I have been diligent, I have been persistent, and I have not let up on this for the past 10 years. So this is definitely, you know, kind of a long-term EDRR, but I haven't given up yet. So as I mentioned, Reed Island is the last known reproductive population that we have here in Jacksonville. So it is a retired dredge material management area. It had huge, probably 40-foot tall tamarix trees, giant stems, you know, huge trunks. And we didn't have any active funding. We didn't have any sort of management authority really for this location. So it was something that we had to utilize volunteers. So back in 2012, I utilized my relationship with the First Coast Invasive Working Group to get them motivated and target this location. We ended up having several work days throughout 2012. I think we had a couple in February and then again in August of that year. And we had, this was kind of the site conditions at the time. So there are two different cells on Reed Island. Both of those are represented by that yellow and orange coloration. And so those are the areas where they would have been depositing that fresh dredge material. So the orange represents the densest infestations of salt cedar where it was getting close to that monoculture stage. The yellow is a little more scattered, and then the red dots represent individual locations that were outside of the main cells. So we had over 16 different agencies represented during our volunteer work days. People from as far as Georgia, the Department of Natural Resources, to down in Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. You know, we even had somebody from over in Tallahassee come over. So we had this huge group of volunteers. You can see in the background, most of the trees that you see back there are salt cedar. So this was a huge undertaking, but I can't thank the volunteers enough. They did an amazing job of helping to control what was out there, especially without having you know, any true resources to be able to tackle it. It's not moving forward for some reason. There we go. So again, you can see the height of the trees down there in the bottom. You know, they were very tall. So, you know, having chainsaws and cutting down trees was definitely a hazard. You know, anytime you're using chainsaws with volunteers, it can be pretty nerve-wracking. Again, you can see that top picture, how dense the infestation was. On the left, you can see they were just loaded with flowers. Definitely a huge seed source for surrounding areas. You see the bottom left, a lot of these trees had multiple stems. They also had large spreading roots that were coming in and out of the soil. With all of the root sprouting that these trees are known to do, we also had to address those roots, and you can see some of those are cut up, and herbicide was applied to those as well. So this was a huge undertaking for a crew of volunteers. And you know, there was no way that we were going to be able to tackle the entire population. So between that time, we did the volunteer effort in 2012. There was a legal issue with one of the neighboring property owners. There was a lawsuit with JEA because they had been blocking access to Reed Island, and it turned into kind of a very dicey situation where you don't want to be involved as a group of volunteers with no real authority to be out there. So we kind of had to back off for a while. But just recently, Jacksport sold their portion of Reed Island to a homeowners association to allow for that HOA to deposit dredge material from their little marina boat basin that they have. So that sale went through in late 2018. The city of Jacksonville also owns a portion of the property out there. And because they were going to have to access the city of Jack's property to use the disposal island, the city of Jax was able to make the sale contingent upon them doing a full survey and treatment of all of the salt cedar on Reed Island, not just in the cell that they were going to use, but the entire area, the surrounding marsh. All of that has to be surveyed and treated with 2 follow-up treatments over the following year. Then the First Coast Invasive Working Group will coordinate any further monitoring and treatment until we can declare the population eradicated. So this is kind of a shot of Reed Island then and now. So there's that map that I had showed previously showing the dense infestations that were out there. That large cell that's kind of off to the bottom left, that is now the picture on the right. So they went in with heavy equipment, they cleared the site, they took all the vegetation, piled it up, burned it, and now they are actively using the site for dredge material. So this picture was taken in February of 2020. And unfortunately, that was maybe 2 weeks prior to all of the COVID lockdown. So that definitely sort of delayed the additional survey and treatment of the remaining areas. But I am happy to say that we do have the survey scheduled for the week of July 14th. So it's right around the corner. Once we get those remaining areas surveyed for all the salt cedar, we will be doing the treatments to make sure that we eliminate all of those mature trees. At that point, we should have all of the mature trees controlled. And at that point, we'll just be monitoring for any of those seeds that have already been spread and deposited to germinate. So within the next year or so, as long as we don't have any further seed production, we should be able to declare victory. So we are very close, closer every day. I can't wait to have the survey completed and see, you know, what we've got ahead of us, but I feel very confident that we'll be able to declare victory soon, not another 12 years. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jessica. So we do have some questions coming in, and I want to, let's see, to address these questions, I want to throw some links up in the chat box as well. Oh, shoot, sorry, I'm having some copy and paste trouble here. Here we
I
go.
think I saw one asking about the plant listing, like that it's
So
not
it's not
included on the FLEPC list.
And the question is, will there be a risk assessment? So I did look, it has been assessed by the UF IFAS assessment. So I put that link there. I also put the links to the EDMAPS distribution in Florida and the and what shows in the plant atlas, because Christine Campbell, who asked the question about it being on the FLEPC list, mentioned that it had been vouchered in Franklin County, and that also shows up in EDMAP. So I guess a two-part question here is, has FLEPC considered this as a potential species for the FLEPC list? And do you know about that Franklin County point, and has that been managed?
So we did evaluate it for the FLEPC list, and basically it was not added to the list because it was such a limited distribution in Northeast Florida, and it was actively being managed. So the risk of it invading natural areas was considered low because it had not happened in the state of Florida. But there was some debate because in Georgia, it has definitely been getting into natural areas. So at the time, it was not voted on to the list. As far as the population over in Franklin County, somebody that I know had gone over there. It appeared that it was kind of a cultivated location, and there was no evidence of it spreading from there. So as far as I know, if that tree is still there, it has not been able to spread from that point. It is a concern of mine, and if it were my choice and it wasn't on private property, I would probably go over and tackle it myself. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on and be aware of. But yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I noticed in the distribution there is some. It is reported in coastal Georgia, not too southern coastal Georgia. So definitely a good note to be aware of. So another question asked, what is the potential for spread of this species south? And do other U.S. Army Corps regions in Florida, for example, Tampa, actively look for this species?
Yes, so I'm also responsible for the dredge disposal sites down in Tampa. We do active invasive species control out there, so if it was there, we would have seen it by now. But no, it has not been found. One of my concerns, and probably the way that it first got established in Jacksonville, is through movement of seeds on dredging equipment. And so that's something that I've been working with the Army Corps to try to address, as far as, you know, I know for certain that in Georgia, the dredge disposal sites that are in Savannah are covered with salt cedar. I mean, it's almost an entire, you know, hundreds of acres of monoculture of salt cedar. So I suspect that how it first got established was there was a dredging company that was working in Savannah, and then they came to Jacksonville right after they were done, and seeds were still on the equipment. They have, you know, the dredging equipment that's out in the channel, but then they also have heavy equipment that has to move the pipes and do stuff, you know, on the ground on the disposal islands. So I suspect that that's how it first got established. And then, you know, once it started reproducing, you know, the site conditions on those disposal sites are just ideal habitat for it to get established. So that's kind of how it ended up spreading to all those locations.
I'm curious, and I apologize if you said this and I missed it, but those two Florida inland navigation sites, did they tackle them? Like, were they responsive to being responsible for management there, and were they responsive to messages about spread via equipment?
Yes. So we actually work with them on the dredging for the intercoastal. So we also have funding available to, you know, to do the dredging. But then I was able to tap into some of that to be able to do the control efforts out there. And at this point, we haven't had any new salt cedar show up at those locations since probably 2013 or 14. So I'm pretty confident those populations have been eradicated from those particular sites. But there was definitely another instance with that southernmost site. That site is also the northernmost site of Old World climbing fern. So that again was likely due to equipment transfer. When we first found it, it was right along the edge of the ditches where the mowing equipment had gone through. So we were also pretty confident that that was spread via equipment as well, because again, it was a huge jump from, you know, what the northernmost population was at the time.
Great, thank you. So I'm not getting any other questions coming in. Of course, if anyone has other questions about the project or the plant, you can reach out to Jessica. And thank you so much for presenting this today. I really appreciate your time. And it's great to see how this project has advanced. And we're looking forward to the update when you can declare your victory.
So am I.
So please let us know so we can follow up on that. So with that, I just have a few FISP/CISMA updates for folks today. I wanted to share, so in the email announcement about this call, I also shared kind of a request to folks to kind of help us look at the species list in the I've Got One app. And see what may be missing, primarily from the plant side, but animal species are welcome as well. My understanding is that the animal side was actually a bit more fleshed out from the get-go. So the issue that we're having is that if you log in online to EdMaps, there's a lot more species present there. Pretty much everything I think that you can come across at this point is online, but when you use the app in the field from your phone, there are some plants that we as CISMAs have been asking folks to look out for and report that aren't currently in the app. And so it just adds an extra layer. If folks are hoping to use the app, they're not able to report those species as easily there. So I sent out one question, really quick form, which was, do you have any species that need to be added? And that link is at the top. If you scroll to the top of the chat, I shared a few links there. So the link to this form is there. I also included in the email I sent out just a screenshot PDF list of all the species that are currently there to kind of help you take a look to see what may be missing. So if you didn't get that and you'd like it, let me know. If you open the app, I just wanted to share real quick an easy way to check for species as well. If you open the app, this is your home screen. You can just go to all species. For me, it defaults to alphabetized common names. It's easier for me to look via scientific names. So if you just hit this button up at the top that says scientific, it will give you an alphabetized list of all of the species that are in the app by scientific name. So you can really quickly find whether a species is listed or not that may be of interest. I sent out an email today reminding folks of this survey, and in that email I included the species that have already been reported. So if you didn't get that, if you're not on the CISMA listserv, let me know so I can forward that to you and also get you on the CISMA listserv. But I just wanted to share what had already been submitted just to save your own time and any repetition moving forward. So we have a pretty good list. And I wanted to mention, you know, if you have a moment just to take a look at this and make sure there's nothing that's a priority for you or that you're asking volunteers to report, that you do go ahead and do this, because in talking with Chuck, it's much easier for them to add a bulk of species at one time than to kind of get individual requests. So that kind of spurred our effort to go ahead and get folks to submit. So if you have a moment, take a look at that. It's greatly appreciated. And again, it's just a super simple survey, one question, and you're set. So one question is if any of the Dioscorea, if I'm pronouncing that right, should be added. Specifically Dioscorea dodecanarua. I'm butchering that Latin. So that may be a question that we can tackle. And if anyone has any information on that plant, actually that was a recent question we had from a stakeholder. Let us know. We're looking into that one. So we can certainly, if you'd like to fill that one into the survey, we can certainly submit it. So with that, again, if you have any questions, just let me know. But we appreciate everyone's kind of eyes on that to get this update going. Lastly, I just wanted to share this recent publication from the team that I work with at University of Florida IFAS. We have been working for a while now on this extension document, which was recently published in the Journal of Extension. Essentially what we're trying to do is suggest or provide some standardized language for talking to stakeholders on invasive species issues. And so this article, which will eventually be turned also into an EDIS document that is more Florida-centric, but this article works for Florida as well, but we'll just include there's some more details specific to Florida that will be included in the EDIS document. But essentially what we did was boil it down to 7 terms that can be used pretty much across the board, and that if we're all using them in the same way, will help clarify our stakeholder outreach efforts. We also listed some terms to avoid that have been used in the past, but that for various reasons, which are outlined in the paper, are not as good to use anymore. We include a section on terms related to legal definitions, because there are some terminology that's kind of specific to restrictions and legal codes and things like that. And then lastly, there's a glossary of additional terms that is there primarily because one of our biggest challenges was, you know, I think for most of us who do kind of this stakeholder outreach, we're generally dealing with folks who are somewhat knowledgeable, but when you start using words that kind of are too jargony to the scientific community, you can lose your audience. And so, but we also recognize that your audiences may be diverse. So we wanted to include terms that may be either more scientific or even that like terms like weed and pest and how we define those, even though they aren't one of the 7 terms to use regarding invasive species. So this is just something we're really excited to share with everybody. We hope it'll be a helpful tool. You know, we'll be sharing it across Extension to hopefully kind of get all our Extension agents on the same page. But one note I wanted to make is that this is not intended to be a scientific community consensus document. You know, just working with 30+ folks within UF IFAS to write this up, you know, those of us in this field can sit around and argue the minutia of the terminology all day long. This is really meant for outreach and education purposes when we're talking to more general audiences, you know, so that we are sharing a similar message. So the question is, there's a question here, is it easy to get the article? I'd love to read and share. The link is at the top of the chat. And I'll go ahead, let's see if I can just paste it again at the bottom. So yes, please, we encourage you to read, we encourage you to share. You know, like I said, we're kind of just excited to have this out and available to folks. And hopefully you'll find it useful as we have. So with that, just real quickly, coming up on the next couple months, next month, I'm really looking forward to getting an update on the Brazilian pepper tree biological controls that started being released last year from Dr. Mintier. So hopefully you guys will join us for that in July. In August, we are going to hear about a regional Kogan grass coordination program going on in the Panhandle. This has been a project with Six River CISMA and Longleaf Alliance, and it's a really cool example of kind of creative ways to get private landowners and public landowners working together. And then in September, we're going to hear about some research from Dr. James Leary with UF IFAS on mechanical harvesting of aquatic invasives. This was kind of born out of the aquatic plant treatment pause and the request from stakeholders to have more research on alternative options to herbicides. So looking forward to hearing kind of James's take on that. And I know some of his materials have been released through blogs with IFAS as well. So hopefully you guys will join us. And just a reminder that if you do miss a call, or if you just want to revisit or share a presentation, all of our past calls are available online. So on the page where you'll find the call schedule and the call how to join information, there's a button at the bottom that says past calls. And so we make that all available to you. And please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So lastly, just thank you everyone for joining us today. And I look forward to talking to you again in July. Have a great rest of your week.